Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Scott Giacomucci, and I'm the author of Trauma-Informed Principles in Group Therapy, Psychodrama, and Organizations, Action Methods for Leadership. And in this video today, I wanted to talk to you a bit about the content from Chapter 9 in this book, which is focused on the fifth of the 6 trauma-informed principles outlined by SAMHSA. This chapter is titled Empowerment, Voice, and Choice in Group Therapy, Psychodrama, and Leadership. So in this video, before we jump into this video, I want to just name that these 6 trauma-informed principles really go hand in hand. Although I'm going to be talking about this principle as separate from the others, it would be really important that you also consider the other 5 trauma-informed principles in your work. And I encourage you to check out some of the other videos on this channel that outline the other 5 trauma-informed principles. We can't fully embody the spirit of empowerment, voice, and choice without also addressing the other trauma-informed principles. So trauma, by its nature, is inherently disempowering for trauma survivors. The trauma can be characterized by unspeakable terror, helplessness, powerlessness, which are fundamentally disempowering. In most cases, the victim of trauma has their voice, their choice, and their power taken from them. So it makes sense that SAMHSA would really elevate this as a trauma-informed principle: voice, choice, and empowerment. A traumatic experience often disintegrates one's sense of personal power, mastery, control, confidence. Trauma, as well as traumatic stress, can really impact one's ability to speak up and feel like they have a voice in the aftermath of that trauma. I mean, so much of the work that we end up doing in trauma therapy and trauma recovery is about helping clients find their voice and use their voice. In the midst of trauma, a victim often cries out for help, but might feel a sense of abandonment or voicelessness when nobody responds, or the people or systems that were supposed to be there to protect them, to prevent this type of thing from happening, abandon their authority and don't. There can be a real mistrust that develops in the aftermath of trauma, a distrust that nobody's going to listen, nobody's going to respond next time I ask for help because they didn't respond when I really needed them. There can be this sense of learned voicelessness or learned helplessness that develops in the aftermath of trauma. Learned voicelessness, although it can sound like it's about the trauma survivor's lack of ability to speak up, but it's less about their ability to speak up and more about their lack of confidence in people or systems to respond when they do speak up. And this sort of voicelessness even has some neurobiological grounding, in that in neuroscience studies related to trauma, when they ask someone to remember a traumatic experience and they take a brain scan at that moment and they look at parts of the brain that are active or that are less active or inactive, one of the parts of the brain that's entirely shut down is the Broca's area, which is the speech and language part of the brain. And so this finding has really challenged us as therapists, especially, to reconsider the effectiveness of talk therapy alone. If the speech and language part of the brain is shut down when somebody's remembering a traumatic experience, thinking about a traumatic experience, how helpful is just talking about it going to be? This finding also really validates what every trauma survivor knows, is that it's really hard to find words to talk about the trauma. We don't want to talk about it. It's painful to talk about it. It's hard to talk about it. And it's really difficult to convey the experience of it because it's so overwhelming. Trauma's devastating impact on one's sense of empowerment, choice, and voice make each of these principles essential to a trauma-informed approach. A trauma survivor's power, their voice, and their choice are so often diminished. Therefore, our approaches must orient around restoring power or empowering, emphasizing their voice and their choices. In the context of power and empowerment, we should differentiate between personal power and an abuse of power. Sometimes trauma survivors can kind of flip flop back and forth between powerlessness or reenacting unhealthy power dynamics in relationships. Empowerment is really about a restoration of neutrality, voice, and choice. It's about power with and power to and power within rather than having power over others. And there's a lot that's been written about those differentiations. I want to challenge us to reflect on how are we elevating the voices of our clients and avoiding reenactments of abandonment? In what specific ways do we promote choice and autonomy in our work with trauma survivors? In my work, it's one of the first things that I do is I emphasize the client's right to choose how much they want to participate, what they want to share and when, how much they want to share, in what way they want to share or talk about their trauma in terms of specifics or in a general way. In my groups, all the clients know they have the option to participate, to observe. They have a choice about everything. That forcing somebody to do trauma therapy or forcing somebody to talk about trauma before they're ready to is really not helpful, and it's potentially harmful.